Welcome to the SIWIKE podcast, the only podcast that shares the stuff you didn't know you needed to know about jobs, careers, and life. The SIWIKE podcast, the stuff I wish I knew earlier.
Hi, everyone, and welcome to the SIWIKE Stuff I Wish I Knew Earlier podcast. We're here with one of our new guest hosts, Shaan. Shaan, how are you doing today?
Really good, Luki. Thank you. Thanks for having me.
My pleasure. So Shaan comes from a background of business and a bit of marketing, customer experience, things like that. So if you can tell us a little bit about what you're doing now, and then we'll go back in time and talk about Shaan as a kid. So Shaan, what are you up to these days?
Yeah, absolutely. So I am a management consultant at one of the big four firms, and I'm focusing on solving any sort of business's operational and strategic issues and helping them become, more optimized, more efficient, and just operate better. It's a really exciting field, and I'm very pleased to be a part of it and grateful for the opportunities to work with some really awesome clients and be able to make an impact in their business.
Sounds good. So in typical consulting fashion, a lot of like big buzzwords and stuff like that. We'll get into a little bit about that more. So if we can kind of go back in time and think about, well, what was Shaan like as a kid? So what are some of the earliest, fondest childhood memories that you have, Shaan?
Yeah, I mean, as a kid, I remember being very positive. I enjoyed, playing outside a lot, and I actually didn't grow up having any video game consoles or spending a lot of time on the computer, but really my parents encouraged me and my younger sister to, go outside and go to the park and things like that. So a lot of my memories are just, playing in the backyard and going out to the park to play. And I feel like now that's helped me in my adulthood just appreciate that a little bit more rather than in my downtime, spending it on a computer game or something like that. And yeah, I think for me, school was a big focus in my childhood. So my parents are actually both in education, and that was always a focus in our home, to be really thinking about school and really focusing on that. So, was always working and studying, going to extra sort of tutoring sessions on the weekend to make sure that I was up to date on everything that was coming in the year ahead. And I would say that it was very fond because for me, that helped sort of solidify an appreciation for learning. And that was something that, I hold very near and dear to me now. And especially in consulting, you always have to be learning about new industries and new clients and new approaches. So that's something that I feel started in my childhood, but still really appreciate today, and in how I sort of think about careers and approaching new things. And even just on the personal side too, like thinking about, if you want to try a new hobby or if you want to try a new activity, having the willingness to learn that, which isn't always the most comfortable thing, I would say.
Yeah, definitely. Because when you're learning something, you're outside of your comfort zone, and oftentimes you're uncomfortable as you're starting to get into it. And being uncomfortable is not fun, right?
Exactly.
Especially if it's something totally new and you kind of suck at it at first too. And then only after a few times you actually get the decent, good, and then you're actually pretty great at it eventually, if you want to, right? And I'd love if you talked a little bit about some more about those influences. So you had your parents, obviously, in education. Were you a good student at that time, and was like studying and marks easy for you, or was that a challenging aspect of growing up?
I think that eventually, as I got into maybe, grade 4, 5, 6, like the higher grades, I started to be a really top student. And that was, I would say in some subjects came more naturally to me than others. But at home, the conversations weren't like, oh, why didn't you get this grade in this subject? But, oh, like you're really skilled at math and language, for example. And your science mark isn't as high, but that's okay, right? And your art mark, for example, is not as high, but that's okay. And then it was just more about thinking like, oh, hey, I know that I'm really good at some things and maybe not as good as other things. And to me, then that just, again, like when I focused on the learning, like, am I learning something? Then through the process, like maybe at the midterm mark, I wasn't the highest grade, but was able to turn that around by the end by just focusing on that learning process, right? And, as I'm reflecting on that and thinking about that now, I'm like, this is the advice that I wish I was hearing like throughout university and things like that. Because when I think I somehow, gravitated away from that, especially as it was probably in high school towards the end where you're just so focused on getting the top grades because you want to get into your university programs and focusing on that, right?
Sure.
And along the way, losing a little bit of that learning focus and more going towards like, oh, I just need to get that grade because I need to get into the program.
Right.
And I think that's, I know we'll get into the stuff I wish I knew a bit later, but it is something that I think if I go back and tell myself, it's like everything does end up working out, but really try to focus on like, what are you good at and what do you want to do? And from there, like when you put in that energy towards that, it ends up being better than like, oh my God, I just need to get that 90 in that course and do whatever it takes to get there.
For sure. I'm reminded of some folks that top performing from a study perspective, academic perspective, but some of them will actually pick like the easy course, which they know they can get a high grade, versus the more challenging course that they're more interested in and they know they'll probably learn more, just because there is that kind of perception of failure and like you need the high marks, the high GPA and things like that, which if we didn't have that, I think the world would be a much more interesting place where more people could try those types of things. So I think it's a good piece of advice for folks to consider. Now, it doesn't make it easier when you could have had a high mark on one thing and you don't end up, even though you sort of love it more. But I mean, it's choices that we make. And I'd love for you to walk through a little bit about that interest in business. So you ultimately went into different sorts of business school, taking an MBA as well. But where did that come from? Like, was it kind of your parents nurturing you and saying, hey, you have this aptitude for it, or were there other influences that kind of put you along that path?
Yeah, honestly, I would say that I was really confused in high school. I didn't know really I think because of that, I had a lot of interest and tried a lot of things and focused on that learning. I could really see myself in different fields. So in elementary school, for example, I didn't really like science too much, but as I got into high school, I actually started enjoying science a lot more and was really into chemistry of all things. And I was like, oh, can I see myself being like a chemical engineer or studying chemistry? And I had applied to those programs. And I then also was like, oh, business, I think that's really interesting, but didn't really know what business entailed. But applied to like a couple of business school programs. And even then within that, some business programs in undergrad are a little bit more specialized. So I had applied to an accounting program at Waterloo. So had a couple of things that I was considering all the way from like engineering to sciences, life sciences, and then business programs. And on the side of that though, in high school, I actually got really interested in photography as well. And it was one of my my friends in the photography club even suggested like, oh, are you going to apply to any sort of like arts programs in photography? I didn't end up doing that, but it was a nice sort of compliment from them. They actually pursued that route and they're a photographer now. And I thought, oh, okay, like that's now just reflecting back, I'm like, oh, that's really nice that they thought of me in that light too. But ultimately, I think what I was narrowing it down to was like a life science sort of approach or a business route. And when I was talking to in high school, really like my parents were supportive of any direction that I wanted to go in. So then I just talked to, a couple of family friends and some teachers as well to just get their opinions, some guidance counselors, and really grateful for those mentors at the time who helped kind of give that first, advice and that really big sort of milestone that I would say a student has to make in their life where they're now deciding on some different routes that, before for the last, 16 to 18 years, it was really prescribed for you where you're going. You're just going to the next grade and all your friends are doing the same thing. And now it's like, oh, you have to kind of take a step by yourself, right? So really grateful for those folks. And I made sort of like the pros and cons list of each of the programs and, just ranked that and then visited some of the campuses on like my top 3 choices and ultimately made the decision to go to SIWIKE, so the business school at York University. And that's I don't regret it. It was a good decision, and I'm really happy with how everything turned out. But definitely in the first year, actually maybe even first 2 years, was quite difficult. And I was used to kind of being that top performing student in high school and doing what it takes to get the grade, and then saw my grades really take a dive, and that sort of affected me, and thinking like, oh shoot, like, did I make the right choice? Was this actually a good decision? But I think that was all part of the process. And when I shifted away from that focus on, like just trying to get the grades and focusing on the learning and focusing on what I was doing in university, that helped a lot. And, speaking of kind of, influences and people, I had quite a number of professors in university, I would say, who really helped me a lot think about what direction I wanted to go in. And, as I mentioned, entering business school, I didn't really have an idea too much of what I wanted to do. And I thought, I see a lot of accountants in sort of like the community and family friends and people that I know. And I know that, at SHU, there's a lot of people that go into accounting, so maybe I'll take that route. And in second year of university, my marketing professor, Professor McGrain, she really helped me sort of think about that a little bit more, and think about why maybe marketing would be a really great choice for me to go into. And I remember just like having coffee with her and her saying like, are you sure you really want to be an accountant? And I was like, well, I'm actually not sure. I don't think so. And she's like, oh, maybe you should look into marketing and thinking about that. And I really enjoyed her class. And actually, I didn't even get the best mark in her class. I think I got like maybe a 75, but I think just at that point, I was like, oh, I really just enjoy the work. I enjoy the learning that I had there, and that, helped me direct my attention a little bit more. And then when I had a professor in marketing in fourth year, which in third and fourth year, you get to take a little bit more specialized marketing courses. It's not just general, kind of overall marketing. It's more specific in like brand management or digital marketing or customer experience, or consumer behavior. So it was actually my digital marketing professor, Professor Humayun, and she was like, oh, like, you're really talented. And at that point, then I had kind of, solidified that, oh, like, this is what I'm interested in. This is what I want to do. And I ended up doing really well in her class. And after in fourth year, then before I started working at Walmart, I had an internship at L'Oreal, which is like one of the biggest sort of marketing centric companies. And I was working in digital marketing there. So that was a really kind of full circle moment where I went from in first year, not really knowing too much about what I wanted to do, thinking about, like maybe accounting, to having this professor who was able to shed a little bit of light on her experience working in marketing and then teaching marketing students, specializing in that, and then, entering the field. And there's a lot of other folks along the way too, but I would say those two professors in my undergrad. And now actually when I just wrapped up my MBA, Professor Giesler, he was really quite an instrumental professor for me too, and just the way that I think about problem solving. And although the course was in marketing, the approaches I would say that he shared in class and in our conversations were more focused on bringing it beyond kind of marketing and thinking about like how you can really make an impact on the world through the work that you do. And I really liked that and thought that, hey, that really, it's really eye-opening that, even from the little experiences maybe that we design through an email or through, an in-store activation or whatever it may be, can have really big impacts on being inclusive and sharing, a bigger picture with people. And even if it just impacts one person, then it's worth it. So he really helped kind of open my eyes to that as well.
That's awesome. So a lot of great information to unpack in that. And what kind of comes to mind for me is the importance of if you are one of those professors or those mentors or people that actually identify something in someone, or just kind of mention, hey, have you thought about this or that? Sometimes those moments can be game changers or life changers for many people. So I'm kind of interested in whether you could like tag these professors and say, hey, did you know that you changed the course of my life, my career, my trajectory, that sort of stuff? Because sometimes folks don't really have an appreciation of how impactful they could be in other people's lives. So I think that would be very interesting to share. I like what you said about like going for the learning versus the grade. And we alluded to that, I guess, at the beginning of our conversation. And I'd love if you are able to unpack a little bit, if we go back to the beginning of the what you were talking about the decision, because you had so many different possibilities, life sciences, business, and well, maybe arts, but not exactly arts. But you mentioned like a pros and cons list and visiting the different choices. But if you could kind of walk us through a little bit of some of what was on the pros and cons, what was some of the evaluation, and then what actually kind of led to, you know what, I am going to pick business, because if you could do anything and everything, why not? Right? So that must not have been an easy decision. So if you can walk us through a little bit, and obviously it's going to be different for different people, but just to give an idea of that decision, I think would be very helpful for folks. So yeah, if you could share a little bit about that, if you recall any of that would be appreciated.
Yeah, absolutely. So I remember thinking about, okay, in really kind of then researching a little bit more about programs and in some schools, for example, you might not be in like the business school right away from day one. It might be actually like a general stream. So I looked at maybe like program structure and subjects as like the first kind of bucket in what I was exploring. So at that point, I would say like that's, maybe a little bit more specific to like the business programs that I was looking at, where the accounting program at Waterloo, for example, was just, it's all kind of like accounting and finance based. Whereas at SIWIKE, it was a little bit more general in terms of like all business focused, but you got that breadth of what you could explore in business. And then in for example, another school I was considering was Rotman at University of Toronto. And in that program, actually, in your first year, you're in more of like the general arts and science kind of field. And then in your subsequent years, you're in Rotman and taking those business courses, right? So that was, looking at kind of like the program structure. That was one thing that I was exploring. The other thing
when you talk about like the decision to go from math to business, because that's already you've already decided on business, but sorry, not math, the sciences to business, because you were also exploring life sciences and engineering. You mentioned to make that decision. Like what was that? Like?
So I think with the science and engineering side, so I really was not a top student in physics. I knew that was like one of my subjects that I just like it was not clicking for me. And that's where I kind of at that point ruled out engineering a little bit. I was like, I don't really feel like I want to study this when I'm not very passionate about studying it, right? I think there's definitely subjects that you just kind of naturally gravitate to a little bit more. And physics, I was like, I just really can't, like, that was the homework that I was always like putting off to the last minute. And I think it was good that I, was real with myself to be like, I can't see myself studying this for 4 years and continuing that, right? So that was sort of like ruling out the engineering side. And then the part about, science and sort of just evaluating those options, like I was really thinking about, well, eventually I do want to, work, right? At least at that time, I wasn't thinking about, like spending, doing master's degrees or possibly PhDs or additional studying. And I don't think I explored to the extent of like what you could do with a life science degree, but I think just generally from when I was talking to people and sort of my very preliminary research and sort of like career quizzes that you kind of do in high school through like civics and careers and stuff like that, I was like, oh, it seems like there's a lot more options if you study, a business degree versus like a life science degree. And that was just my, maybe my own bias from what I was picking up from, the conversations that I was having for people or through those kind of career tests. So that's where I was like, oh, maybe business might give me some more options to think about. And that's how I kind of ruled out science. But again, I think what I recall as well is when I was talking to even some of my science teachers, especially my physics one. I remember I was talking to him because I was like, oh, I don't think I want to do engineering because I really don't really enjoy this subject. But he actually, I guess, gave me some good advice too, where he was like, well, do you see yourself really studying like sciences for a few years? And he's like, you're really good with people, and you can really communicate well, and you have a lot of creative ideas. And he's like, there might be something in business too, right? And just as we're having this conversation now, like I remember that conversation, and when I told him, I was like, oh yeah, like I got into SIWIKE, I got into Rotman, I got into these business programs, and he's like these are really great programs. Like why are you even thinking twice about like going into one of these ones, right? And I was like, oh, I mean, I guess that makes sense, right? So, yeah, I mean, honestly, I think just reflecting on this, like I'm very, very thankful for all of these teachers and professors, and my parents and just different mentors and family friends who have had along the way who've been able to talk with me. And even there's one mentor that I have, and I'm still in contact with him today, and he's a SIWIKE grad as well. And I think just that conversation that I had with him, where I was like, oh, I think I'm gonna choose SIWIKE, and he's like, yeah, like it's a really great decision. And the interesting thing is that he actually did do the CPA route, and he is a chartered accountant, but now works actually in the retail industry, in merchandising. So it was sort of close to what I was doing before when I was at Walmart, before I moved to my current position in consulting. And even though, I guess his career path and my career path is different, it converged a little bit. And he was able to kind of give me, I always appreciate his advice, because he never says like, oh, this is what I did and you should do it too. But he's like, oh, like this is what you're doing, and you're doing really great, and think about that. And I always appreciate that in mentors, where they don't, specifically say like, oh, this is what I did and you have to do that. But like, oh, this is what I did, but you're doing like a really great path too, and kind of providing that view. So I always appreciate his advice, and he definitely helped me as well kind of solidify that. Oh yeah, I think SIWIKE will be a good choice to go to.
Sounds good. And what I took from that is make sure to have conversations, because I do find that a lot of folks, they try to make the decisions themselves, right? They do a whole bunch of research on the internet and, pros and cons lists or whatever. But unless you have kind of those conversations where people who've been there, done that, those mentors, as you'd mentioned, that can be a big difference, because sometimes what you read online, well, that's marketing for that particular program, for that particular role, job, company, whatever, versus someone who's been there and done that, and they can hopefully share some of the good and sometimes the not so good, or the things that you have to watch out for, and just be prepared so that your expectations are set. So I think that was helpful. And I'm wondering if you can kind of move along from your undergrad days. So you mentioned that you landed a role at Walmart. How was that experience? Was that like easy? Did you kind of have that before you graduated, or was the transition from like the undergrad into the working world, was that pretty challenging?
Yeah, I mean, so I was very fortunate that when I was interviewing, I went through sort of like the on-campus recruitment cycle. But I would say that wasn't always the case for me. I really struggled up until, I would say, third year, actually getting an internship through the on-campus recruitment. So maybe I'll provide a little bit of light on how that works at York University. But basically, there's the postings that kind of come out through the campus portal, and usually what happens, and now kind of also being part of the recruitment at my firm, I know that there's sometimes like spots that are allocated for specific schools, for example, right, that you have. And that's where the posting kind of goes to. And there's a little bit more of a tighter link between the HR at the company and sort of like the campus recruitment team, or the campus team that facilitates those student placements, versus, you can find your own job sort of outside of that and applying to internships that are just generally posted, or full-time roles that are posted outside. So when I was in first and second year, really struggled a lot to find a job. And I remember applying to, I actually still have like my list. I think in my first year, probably applied to like 30 internships or something like that. And then in second year, same sort of thing. but a little bit lighter because I actually did. So I ended up working in the Ontario government in my first summer of between first and second year, and then they invited me back in the second summer. So I didn't apply to as many in the second year, but I was like, oh, let me just put some feelers out and see what happens. But in third year, and actually my manager at the government, she was a really amazing mentor too, because after my second year, she sort of said, you know what, you should really try working in a corporation too to get that experience. And she's like, there's nothing more that we can really offer you here. And she gave me a really good piece of advice that I'll always remember. And now as I'm stepping into sort of manager roles, thinking about this, that she said, my job as a manager is to coach you beyond your job. And I really liked that. And now, when I have my teams thinking about, okay, like coaching them to the next level and beyond so that they can take that and run with it. Right. So, in that third year, kind of September, I remember applying to, I think it was like 100 internships. I applied on campus, off campus, and ended up landing an on-campus internship through Bell. And Bell was a really great employer. They employ, a lot of students in the summer through field roles and corporate roles. And I was in their corporate internship program, which leads to actually like a grad program. So grad programs are when organizations have that sort of like a rotation program where they choose students to be, or new grads to be a part of, to get the opportunity to work in cross-functional teams across the business. And there's also, some leadership development and training as part of that as well. So in fourth year then, I was applying to all of those kind of like leadership programs. And that was my my goal to kind of get into that. And I ended up, and consulting as well. I think everyone tries to throw their hat in the ring for consulting and see what happens there. But I ended up getting some offers before it was graduation, and ultimately then ended up at Walmart in their leadership development program. And I would say the transition from school to work was not an easy one, which is why books like the ones that you've authored have really been helpful. I would say I would encourage students to reach out, and even the resources that you put out too are super helpful to just help thinking about navigating that transition, because that is a pretty big milestone that you go through after sort of that initial one of like, choosing what university, but then thinking about, okay, like what am I going to do now, right? And how do I adjust to this new pace? So it wasn't an easy one, but I would say because I had sort of that leadership development piece as well, where we were working with, there was the leadership development teams inside of the organization that facilitated sessions to help us think about career planning, and thinking about, how to work well in teams, understanding your personal brand, understanding your strengths. Those sessions were actually super valuable when you have a clear idea. Like, for example, the true colors. I'm not sure if you've heard of that, where it's like, like you have your, it's similar to like a sort of Myers-Briggs sort of test, where you have like colors that show your personality and like where your sort of strengths are. So having that understanding, and even like I remember doing the Hogan assessment. So there's a bunch of tests that we had access to do. But those really help you kind of deep dive and think about who you are. And if you treat those, kind of seriously and use them, you can then become a better worker and understand how you can, most effectively function in the organization. So those sessions were super, super helpful and super valuable. And I'm very grateful for my time at Walmart and the leaders that I worked with that helped facilitate that.
For sure. And with those assessments, I mean, there's so many of them out there. And for me, it's less about like whether you're a blue or a J or a 9 or whatever it is there. It's more like, well, how do you react to that? And like, what does that what resonates about that, what doesn't, because I don't think these personality tests, like for you to distill the complexity of a human being into like 4 letters, a couple of colors or whatever, it's not possible.
Yeah.
But at the end of the day, it is a very useful reflective tool for you to take a look at and say, okay, what do you think? And then start having conversations. Take a different one, which shows you from a different perspective. What about this one and this one, this one? So they can be quite eye-opening, and hopefully they align and pointing to particular characteristics. But make sure you don't kind of label yourself and keep yourself in whatever colors or numbers or letters that they keep you in. But I love what you shared with all the different statistics that you went through. So yeah, 30 internships is not a lot, to be honest, for you to apply to. So I generally say that if you want to kind of guarantee that you land an internship, it's like 100, 200 that you're really applying to. And it seems like in third year, you did just that, which is awesome. And that helped you ultimately to land into your fourth year. And that obviously gave you a little bit more, you were ahead of the game, because some folks, some of the students, they wait until fourth year to start their job search, versus you were at least aware where I want to get a summer internship between my first, second, third year, that sort of thing, and had all those great kind of coaching along the way. But yeah, for those students that are out there, make sure that you start your job search early. And that doesn't mean like September of your fourth year. That sometimes means your third or second or first year to also start that. So I think that was great. And as we kind of start to wrap up, I guess the episode, if you want to talk about your latest transition, obviously into the consulting, and maybe a little bit on your decision to go and take your MBA, and then we'll end off with some of your SWIKE. So can you talk a little bit about the kind of most recent events or the most recent work that you've been up to? Yeah,
sounds good. So I was coming to a point where I had been at Walmart for almost 4 years and was just thinking about what's next. And, back to my kind of comment on where I said, like throwing my hat in the ring for consulting. It was something that, I thought, it would be so cool to do that. Right. And kind of when you're in business school, you're like, like consultant, like that sounds like such a cool job. Right. And, I think, definitely my intro may have been a little bit jargony, but really what I enjoy, I would say, about the consulting space is you're continuously learning. I really appreciate and value that. And that's something that's been reflective of my childhood and sort of my approach. I really like the, kind of connecting with people, whether that's clients and internally. I think that has also been a very central part of, the discussions and sort of my just being able to try a lot of things. I used to work a lot of customer service jobs as well, like in university, and I enjoyed that people aspect of things. And finally, I would say just overall, the impact that you get to have is really cool to see. And too, like you've been in the consulting space too. It's really such a great feeling when you wrap up an engagement and be able to look back and see like, wow, like you were playing a significant role in solving a complex problem that the client wasn't able to solve by themselves. And that's why they needed someone else to come in and provide that support. So it's a really, really fulfilling feeling to see that. And that's kind of what I would say is like the 3 buckets of what I'm doing in the consulting space now. And sort of like the day to day is like, working on that impact and problem solving, working with people and continuously learning. My MBA, I would say was, so I decided to do a part-time program. I didn't want to leave the workforce for, a year or 2 years to go to a program. And there's a lot of great part-time programs now. And some of them actually are even online too. So you can go to schools in America and get sort of an online degree as well. But I decided to go back to SIWIKE. I started in the pandemic and it was online at that point. And then in 2022, switched to being in person. At the same time, I switched to working at the firm, and I would say it's not anything I would recommend to do, both switching jobs and joining consulting and doing a part-time MBA. But I think it all depends on like your mindset and what your goals are. And ultimately, now that everything is kind of wrapped up, and I've reached the 1 year mark at my firm, it's been a really great experience. And I learned a lot about myself and what I was capable of. And again, I think just my ambitions for going for an MBA was to focus on that learning piece. In the pandemic, I think as well, life started feeling a little bit weird. I think everyone can relate to that, where, things just didn't feel that great. And I missed sort of that community environment that school provided. I missed that sort of, I was actually in the pandemic taking a bunch of just those, Coursera and Udemy courses. And I think even like at some point, maybe it was edX that was giving like you access to it for free or whatever, right? From the top, Ivy schools and things like that. And I liked that, but I was like, oh, I want to do a little bit, something a bit more formal. And that kind of pushed me to just say, okay, you know what, let's take the leap and go for this now. And I would say that was another milestone to just say like, okay, you know what, you enjoy the learning process. You want to, build that community again with school. So I decided to apply and got in, and yeah, here I am a few years later, graduated, and feels really good.
Sounds good. And probably more adventures to come. But if you can, and I know you've shared some of your SWIKE already before, but if you want to, I guess, reiterate or kind of elaborate on some or mention some that you haven't, what is some of the SWIKE, the stuff I wish I knew earlier that you'd share with young Shaan at various points in his life? So
yeah,
what is some
sure.
of the SWIKE that you'd share?
For sure. And so, yeah, we've chatted about a few, but I would say, thinking about like what your purpose is and what you want to do, right? And sort of through exploring those different tests. And I like what you said too, Luki. It's like, you can't really characterize someone based on like a letter or a color, but just reflecting on that and thinking about, okay, like, how does this align with my purpose, or what am I seeing from this? What do I agree with, or what do I not agree with? And aligning that to sort of your ambitions and goals, right? And being patient in the process. I would say that's one of the biggest things, is like focusing on that purpose and that journey side. The other point, which you elaborated on as well, I would say, is the importance of a network and speaking with people. I think, when I chat with students, it's really great when I see students, putting themselves out there at the networking events and taking that opportunity to meet people. But maybe you don't have access to go to the events so easily. And that's where I would say it's like, you can put it on you actually yourself to build that network, right? To reach out to, you can start with like your family and family friends, and then branching out to, cold calling on LinkedIn. And you'd be surprised at how open people actually are to having that initial conversation to help out, right? And then the last thing I would say is not compromising on who you are. I think that's really important, to be authentic and be true to yourself. And again, kind of like linking back to your purpose and what you want to do in life and in your career, being intentional about that and being authentic. I would say that those are the three things that I would tell young Shaan on the stuff I wish I knew earlier.
Sounds good. A lot to unpack in each of those, and probably episodes on their own. What I'll take for the purpose one is trying to be a little bit more proactive. I think you alluded to it at the beginning, where like the first 18 odd years of your life, you're kind of prescribed, like you have to do this. And then when you make that initial choice to go to college, university, or wherever, that's the real first decision that people make. And then everything just becomes more and more decisions. But are you really proactive about that, or are you just taking whatever you can get? So thinking about that, and it's never too early. Now, when you're 12, you probably don't have the life experiences as someone who's 18 or 25, but there's nothing to be said about you trying something and exploring and see what might be helpful. Networking for sure, super important. I'm a huge advocate of that. I often share the acronym FRANK for folks, which is friends, relatives, acquaintances, neighbors, and then kids. And if you happen to be the kid, sometimes it's your friend's parents or your friend's parents' uncles and aunts or whatever it is. That could be super helpful for you to have those coffee chats and things like that. And that whole authenticity part of that, well, that's again another aspect of it on your own. And you probably have to go out and explore to figure out like what is authentically you versus what do your parents want you to be versus what do your older siblings, cousins, this and that expect from you, that sort of thing. And really taking the time to think about who you are there. So thanks so much, Shaan, for sharing your SWIKE, and obviously there's probably more to dive into in future episodes. But if you can share a little bit about any future aspirations that we can look forward to. I know you have a little side project from a career consulting perspective, and we talked a little bit about like mindfulness and purpose and other things that you're also dabbling into. And then where can folks connect with you? So connecting, and then some of the future aspirations.
Yeah,
so if you can share a little bit of that, that'd be great.
absolutely. Thanks for asking, Luki. So yeah, happy to connect with any of the viewers through LinkedIn. My name is Shaan, Jessa. I'm happy to chat with any viewers who would find the conversation useful. In terms of future aspirations, I mean, right now I'm really enjoying the consulting space. It's pretty exciting, and I've only been here for 1 year, so looking to continue to grow there. But in terms of, what else is on the horizon, so I just finished my master's, which was big. But speaking about that professor again, Professor Kiesler, he really opened my eyes to something new. And one thing that I've been really interested in is, exploring kind of like the implications of technology that we're having on society. And I guess that sort of links back to my, thinking about mindfulness as well, is that we are living in such a digital age. And I think that it's important to be aware of that and know how that kind of impacts you. And that's why I've actually been spending a lot more time off of, my screen whenever I do get the chance. Like work, you're so into it. And for sort of my activities outside of work, I'm really trying to be mindful about that and, doing some outdoor activities like running. And now the weather's getting a lot nicer, so looking forward to more of that time. But yeah, that's what's kind of going on with me in terms of now and looking to the future.
Sounds good. So looking forward to those updates, and shout out to all the professors and the teachers out there that are making lots of impact to their students.
Yes.
And thanks again for joining, Shaan, and sharing your SWIKE, and hopefully for a future episode.
Thanks, Luki. I would love that.
Take care.
Take care. Bye.
Thanks for joining us on the SWIKE Stuff I Wish I Knew Earlier, the podcast. If you like the podcast, please subscribe on iTunes, Stitcher, or wherever you found this podcast. And if you can give us a review, that would be very appreciated. Feel free to contact me on LinkedIn at Luki Danu, LUKIDANU, and the same on most social media platforms. And I look forward to hearing from you. Thanks. Bye.